Governor, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MPC and FSC presentation for November by the Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda. Together with us this morning are our partners in the media that have joined us, and we have also people, the public following us online on the National Broadcasting Agency, RBA, and also on our social media platforms. And without any delay, we'll have a Q&A session after this, the presentation by the governor, which will be followed by a Q&A session. Without any delay, I would like to invite the governor for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Can we have the slides on the screen? Yes, good morning once again, and welcome to our colleagues from the media. As usual, we always convene this press conference after our quarterly meetings, the Financial Stability Committee and the Monetary Policy Committee. So I will summarize the outcomes of the two committees using a few slides. Starting with the monetary policy side, we normally start with looking at the global performance of the performance of the global economy. I won't dwell much on this. I know you follow it through the publications by different institutions, more especially the IMF, that we ourselves always refer to. So we still really have challenges across the world, especially with the commodity prices continuing to be high, and we saw the energy and food prices continue to increase, issues of logistics, and so this has kept commodity prices high. We see, maintain the first slide, please. Yes, we have, because of the challenges of the global prices, central banks are taking decisions to tighten their monetary policy across the world almost, in most jurisdictions. And this is having an impact on the financing, on the financial conditions. So it's challenging in terms of trying to address the issue of inflation. Makes it a bit difficult for households and businesses to mobilize finances. And this is going to generally impact the performance of the global economy going forward. We've seen challenges in China, mainly linked to their zero tolerance to COVID, so still lockdowns during the course of the year. And we've also seen challenges in their property market. So when you look at across the globe, there are challenges in the US, high inflation. In fact, Europe is having challenges with the suspicion of it going into recession even next year. So that's briefly on the performance of the global economy, and this is linked to the commodity prices that you see on the next slides. I don't have to go into details. These are numbers that are given by the IMF on the inflation, the global inflation. And when you look at sub-Saharan Africa itself, it's even much higher than the developed world, expected to be at 16.4 on average for this year, 2022. Next, so these are commodity prices that are really driving this global inflation. Both energy index, non-energy index, agriculture index, all have really increased. Now this is, I think, for the second year running with high increases. Let's continue. So when you look at the yes, so this is the global economy, and I have talked about that. So this is the region. Now I want to go to the domestic. Let's go to the domestic side. Continue, Gloria, yes. On the domestic side, despite the challenges we've seen globally and the challenges with our own inflation that I'll come back to in the next slides, the economic performance itself remains strong. So we've seen recovery we saw in 2021 continues to be strong in 2022. The growth is strong, slightly lower than what we had last year. As you remember, last year the overall economic performance was 10.9%. First half of this year, the economy grew by 7.7%. That was 7.9 in the first quarter and 7.5 in the second quarter. When you look at this graph, we track frequent economic numbers and we compile it into what we call the composite index of economic activities. So our graph normally goes in line with the overall actual performance of the economy. So when you look at the first 2 quarters of this year, the CIA was growing at 13.7 in the first quarter, and we saw the economy itself growing at 7.9. The second quarter, the CIAs grew by 11.1%. The economy then grew by 7.5%. Now we are seeing the CIA growing by 17.2% in the third quarter. So we expect this to translate into a stronger real economic growth in the third quarter. We don't have the figure yet. The Institute of Statistics will be producing the actual performance of the economy maybe next month, but at least the numbers indicate that we still have strong economic recovery even in the third quarter of this year. These are details of what contributes to the composite index of economic activities, mainly industry and services. We see strong growth in the 2 sectors, and these are expected to outweigh the bad performance we saw in agriculture. We expect agriculture to remain poor in the third quarter, but the strong performance we see in industry and services is driving the recovery we are seeing. On the external sector front, the exports continue to grow. Merchandise exports continue to grow strong numbers. This is mainly linked to the global commodity prices that we've seen in the first slides. This is contributing to a high increase in our exports, also linked to increased manufacturing for exports. So exports growing by 39.9 in the third quarter of this year. However, we saw equally strong growth in imports. Imports grew by 38.9%, and this is mainly linked to the increased value of especially oil products, but also increased demand as the economy is opening up, as the growth, as we saw in the previous slide, is strong. So we see a lot of imports needed for manufacturing and consumption in the other services sector. So this high growth in imports led to widening of our trade deficit. However, we still have strong reserves and other inflows through government financing and remittances that covers this gap in the trade or this trade deficit. On the monetary policy side, or monetary policy developments, we saw the interbank market rate following the policy rate as decisions were taken in the last quarter. So after the increase of our policy rate to 6%, we saw interbank rates increasing from 5.54 to 6.05 in Q3. We haven't seen that in the lending rates as such. The actual lending rates reduced, the average lending rates reduced to 16.17 from 16.31. And this is mainly linked to the mix of the loans that are approved in a given quarter. So we saw bigger loans to corporates approved in the last quarter in Q3 compared to what it was in Q2, and that brings down the overall interest rate or the average interest rates because of the purchasing or bargaining power of the corporates. They're able to negotiate lower interest rates than individuals. So this reduction in interest rates, lending interest rates, is mainly linked to bigger share of bigger loans by corporates in the overall basket of the loans outstanding or approved last quarter. Similarly to the increase in the deposit rate, this is mainly linked to one of the big institutional depositors that changed their pricing and the tenure of the deposits, so that had an impact on that we see the slight increase in the deposit rates. On inflation, which is our main focus for the monetary policy, as I said earlier, and as you saw with the global inflation itself, inflation in our country has continued to increase. Headline inflation increased from 12.1% on average for Q2 to 16.4% for Q3. Both domestic and imported inflation increased. So if you go to the next slide, and we saw all the components of the inflation increasing in the last quarter, core inflation increasing 10.4 to 12.9. Though the increase is not big here, but because of the share of core inflation into the overall basket of goods, this is the biggest driver of the continued increase in inflation in general. The biggest jump is in food inflation because of poor agricultural performance this year. That is linked to the poor contribution of agriculture to overall economic performance. We saw agriculture inflation really increasing from 16.4 to 29.7. So this had a big contribution to the increase in domestic inflation that you saw. And when you look at the overall year, we've revised our projections to 13.2% annual average inflation for 2022 from 12.1% we had projected in the last quarter. This is also linked to the high inflation we saw in October, breaching the 20% mark. So we expect this high inflation to remain entering into the new year, but we expect to see it going down in the second half of the year to our level of between 8 and 2 going forward. So because of these high inflationary pressures we see by the end of the year, we've decided as a central bank to increase the policy rate to 6.5 from 6% that we had to continue fighting this inflation and bring it back to our band. The other decision that the Monetary Policy Committee took was to reinstate the reserve ratio. If you remember, in April 2020, because of the looming pressures or challenges of COVID, the central bank decided to reduce the reserve ratio from 5 to 4% then, and we've kept it at that level till now. So we think with the inflationary pressures we see, we've decided to reinstate it back to 5% that we had prior to the COVID crisis. So briefly, that's the summary of the outcomes and the decisions of the Monetary Policy Committee. And I will go to the Financial Stability Committee outcomes. Can you have that on the screen, please? Okay. So this is the landscape or the structure of our financial sector, and this is, I'm sure most of you know it. Even if you are asked at any given time, you'll be able to tell or to answer the structure of our financial sector that is dominated by banks. So there wasn't really any big change in terms of the structure. Banks just increased from 67 to 69. So slight changes, but normally this is the structure. There's no big change. This indicates assets of the financial institutions increasing. Overall assets of the financial institutions increased by 18.8 in the last quarter, slightly stronger than what we had seen in September last year. So we see good performance of the assets, mainly linked to increased deposits, increased capital and retained earnings, and this is across almost the subsectors of the financial sector. So we continue to see strong performance of the sector in general. Looking at the bank itself, or the banks themselves, again, we see assets of the, no, in fact, this is really breakdown of assets of banking sector being high, but I think the interesting part here is on the other side of the slide, where we show how much, or the percentage of the assets of insurance sector that are in banks, both in deposits and in investments, pension and microfinance institutions. So this slide just shows the importance of the banking sector. I think we've also explained this before, that there's a lot of interlinkages or strong interlinkages between our subsectors of the financial sector and the bank being at the pivot of all the other subsectors. So this is key to us as a Financial Stability Committee, because when you're looking at the stability, for example, of the insurance or pension, we don't focus on that subsector itself. We also look at the banking sector, because anything that would happen with the banking sector could have an impact on the other subsectors of the financial sector. So this is the assets of the banks continuing to grow, registering strong growth, 20% in the last quarter. And the other slide shows the main components of the assets of the banking industry, which is mainly loans and investment in government securities. So these are the two highly earning investments that banks make, and we are happy to see that they continue to be strong in intermediation as their main role that they're expected to play in the economy. Again, we still see good performance in terms of the banks lending to the private sector. We saw so far outstanding loans growing by 11.5% in the last quarter, though the new authorized loans were slow in growth. In fact, the first 2 quarters, we had negative growth of the new authorized loans. But by the third quarter, we now started seeing positive growth. And this is mainly due to a high or a big loan that was issued last year in the first quarter. So if you remove that sort of outlier, we still see strong growth in terms of the new authorized loans this year. Our main focus, of course, is always on the stability indicators. And here we look at the capital adequacy ratio, how strong or how well are banks capitalized to deal with any external shocks or to continue financing their businesses. So the banks are really well capitalized. That the ratio we follow, the capital adequacy ratio, normally the minimum that they can't go below is 15%. And on average, they're at 22.3%. The other indicator is on the liquidity side. Again, we see banks highly liquid at almost more than double the level that we expect them to always be maintaining. And the quality of the loans have also continued improving. So this quarter we saw the non-performing loans ratio improving to 4.1%. Though there are write-offs that contribute to this improved quality of loans, but the fact that this write-off loans doesn't really impact on the quality of the capital that they sit on, we still feel this is a good measure, and these are indicators that we have strong and stable financial or the banking industry. And the other important thing that we monitor is on the profitability. We see the banks continuing to be profitable, increasing, and this provides for them financing their growth, because most of this capital is always retained in the industry to finance further growth. But also it puts or positions of banking industry as a good destination for investments. On the microfinance institutions, I would say it's really the same story. We see good performance in their assets, in fact, much bigger improvements in their assets. Same with their stability indicators, if you continue. So on the outstanding loans continue to grow, their stability indicators were strong in the microfinance institutions, and all the subsectors of the microfinance institutions. We have the SACCOs, Umurenge SACCOs, we have the limited company SACCO, microfinance institutions, and the non-Umurenge SACCOs. As we see on the other side, they all continue to increase in terms of financing the economy, and their assets grew in the same manner. Continue. As I was saying, the stability indicators also remain strong for the microfinance institutions. I don't have to go into the details of the numbers. On insurance, we again see good performance on the insurance sector, assets increasing by 17%. As you can see on the graph, really the insurance sector started re-performing well from 2017, both in terms of their assets growing, their capital base, if you continue. This is the mix of their investments, which we track as well, because the quality of the investments matters in terms of their stability. We see a big chunk of the investments in government securities and placement in banks, with less or reduced investment in properties that were problematic. So this also is a good indicator of the health of the insurance sector. As I said, on their solvency ratio, which is the stability indicators, they're above, and they continue to improve above the 100% minimum. The solvency ratio now at 192%, and the liquidity ratio, after struggling since the COVID, they have now hit our minimum requirement and went above it to 108%. Now, minimum requirement is 100%, and they also continue to be profitable. Their return on equity and return on assets continue to remain strong. The public pension, I won't say much here, but we can say remains stable, assets increasing by 80%, and the investment income also continue to increase. And the mixture of the investment that we track as well, we can say it's healthy. We continue to advise where we think they need to divest and invest in other stable and high-earning assets. So on this public pension side, we are also happy with their performance, at least up to now. We see the same, in fact, a stronger story with the Ejoheza. The assets growing by 78%, more contributors coming in, and more contributions paid by different Rwandans, which is a good sign of many Rwandans now being covered by pension. That was the aim of establishing Ejoheza. Here, I mentioned really focusing on its development because it's not yet we don't see any threat of instability as of now, because we still see good investments, and the expected withdrawals are not that bad. So we see good stability with this. Same with private pensions, still young but also growing year on year, and good investments. So we see stability here as well. On the mobile payments, I think the story has been increasing since the COVID-19 crisis. Here we see person to person and person to business increasing both in volume and in value. What's important is, or interesting, is on the person to business, we had a reduction in the person to business last year when MTN reintroduced the charges by 0.5% on the transaction amount above 4,000. But there's been mobilization for people to understand the need and the benefits of using digital channels despite the charge. And from the Q1 this year, we've seen now the numbers picking up again, and there have been mobilization campaigns educating the merchants and the population of using digital channels. So we continue to see this showing positive developments. And this is the same with the bank to wallet that has really increased since the removal of charges between movement of money between your own bank account and your own wallet accounts. I think on the last slide we are looking at the summary of the outlook for the financial sector. Based on the numbers, based on the projections we see, we expect the financial sector to remain sound and stable because it's well capitalized. Liquidity buffers are strong. Quality of the assets are improving. So we see this to remain strong, but again, we remain engaged as a supervisor and regulator to ensure or to identify any channels of shocks and to work with the industry to deal with them to avoid it destabilizing the sector. So that's the end of the summary of the discussions of the two committees. I'll try to summarize this in Kinyarwanda before we open up for questions. I think on the kangerageze gutanga incamake y'ibyavuye muri izi mu nama za komite zombi. Hari komite ya politiki y'ifaranga, hari na komite ishinzwe gukurikirana kutajagajega ku rwego rw'imari. Kuri komite ya politiki y'ifaranga dutangira tureba uko ubukungu mu rwego rw'igihugu buba bwifashe ku rwego rw'isi n'ibibazo byaba bihari. Nk'uko mubizi tumaze igihe dufite ibibazo twatangiye n'ibya COVID-19. Ejo bundi mu ntangiriro z'umwaka hazamo ibibazo by'intambara ya Ukraine na Russia. Ibi byatumye habamo guhungabana k'ubukungu bw'isi muri rusange no kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko ku rwego rw'isi. Iyo turebye muri uyu mwaka kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko ku rwego rw'isi bizazamukaho 8.8%. Ni igipimo kiri hejuru cyane ugerageje ubundi byahoraga biri hasi ya 3%. Ikindi kibazo kubera ibyo bibazo birimo byateye ibibazo mu mihahirane, uko ibintu bigenda biva mu gihugu kimwe bijya mu kindi. Ibibazo bya Ukraine byatumye ibikomoka kuri petrol byaturukaga muri Russia bihagarikwa. Ibiribwa byaturukaga muri ibyo bihugu byombi buri uko bigera aho byajyaga. So bituma rero haba ikibazo cyo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro cyane, ari ku biribwa, ari ku mafumbire, ari ku bikomoka kuri petrol. Ibyo byose bigira ingaruka ku biciro muri rusange twita inflation ku rwego rw'isi. Ariko ibyo nabyo byagize ingaruka ku bukungu bw'isi muri rusange, kuko kuzamuka kw'ibiciro byatumye central banks cyangwa se banki nkuru z'ibihugu zifata ibyemezo byo kuzamura igipimo urwunguko rwabo fatizo. Ibi bituma bihagarika cyangwa se bibangamira uko abantu n'abikorera babona amafaranga bashora mu bikorwa bitandukanye by'ubukungu. Ibyo bikagira ingaruka ku bukungu muri rusange. iyo turebye rero ku rwego rw'isi ubukungu uyu mwaka buzagabanuka butera imbere ho gatatu n'ibice 2% ugereranyije n'uko byari byateye imbere kuri 6% umwaka ushize, ndetse umwaka utaho byitaganyijwe ko bizamanuka bikagera kuri 2.7%. So muri rusange hari ibibazo ku rwego rw'isi, niyo uje ku rwego rwa Afurika naho ubukungu buzamanuka, umuvuduko wo kuzamuka k'ubukungu bigere kuri 3.6% uyu mwaka ugereranyije na 4.7 twari twabonye mu mwaka ushize. Tugarutse ku Rwanda, iyo urebye uko ubukungu bwazamutse muri uyu mwaka nubwo buri hasi yuko byari bimeze mu mwaka ushize ubukungu igihugu cyacu bwazamutseho 10.9%, ari ukuzahuka kw'ingamba zari zafashwe na leta mu buryo butandukanye no kuba ibikorwa by'ubukungu byari byafunguwe. Uyu mwaka twakomeje kubona kuzamuka nanone gushimishije ko mu gice cya mbere cy'umwaka ubukungu bwazamutseho 7.7%. Iyo turebye twebwe imbare dukurikirana nka beneri ku buryo bugaragara cyangwa se buboneka vuba, tubona igihembwe cya gatatu cy'umwaka nacyo ubukungu buzatera imbere mu buryo bushimishije. Ku imbare dukurikirana igaragaza ko byumvikanye neza ntabwo ari ubukungu bwose. Iyo mibare dukurikirana agaragaza kuzamukaho kwa 17.2%. Ikigo gishinzwe ibarushamibare mu kwezi gutaha kizatanga uko ubukungu bwazamutse mu gihembwe cya gatatu, ariko imibare dukurikirana twereka ko n'ubundi bizaba bihagaze neza. Mu kwezi gushize Minisiteri y'Imari yazamuye igipimo tukeka ko tubona ko ubukungu buzazamuka uyu mwaka. Ubundi imbere twabibaraga kuri 6%, ubu byashyizwe kuri 6.8%, ariko imibare tubona mu gihembwe cya mbere niyo tubona mu gihembwe mu gice cya gatatu, mu gice cya mbere cy'umwaka n'igihembwe cya gatatu tubona bishobora no kuzamuka kurenga icyo gipimo gishyashya cyatanzwe. Ikindi twavuga ni ku buhahirane n'amahanga, ibintu twohereza amahanga byakomeje kuzamuka ndetse byarazamutse cyane muri iki gihembwe cya gatatu ho 39.9%, bitewe na bya biciro byazamutse ku rwego mpuzamahanga by'ibyo twohereza amahanga. Nubwo rero twishimira ko twabonye kuzamuka gushimisha kw'ibyo twohereza amahanga, ariko ibyo dukura nabyo byarazamutse cyane cyane nk'ibikomoka kuri peteroli nk'ibiribwa, bituma nabyo ibyo tukura amahanga bizamukaho 38.9%. Kubera ko ibyo dukura amahanga ari byinshi kurusha ibyo twohereza, iyo byatumye icyuho cy'ibyo dukura amahanga n'ibyo twohereza cyiyongera aho hafi 38.3%. Ariko ibyo ngibyo kubera ko dufite amafaranga y'amadovize twizigamiye nk'igihugu n'amafaranga aturuka mu banyarwanda baba hanze twita remittances bohereza, n'amafaranga yandi leta ibona mu bafatanyabikorwa, tubona ifaranga ritazahungabana cyane muri uyu mwaka. Tubona bitazarenga 5% muri rusange guta agaciro kw'ifaranga. Reka tujye wenda ku gikomeye cyane tubona ku rwego rw'ubukungu, ni kuzamuka k'umuvuduko w'ibiciro ku masoko. Iyo turebye muri iki gihembwe turimo cya gatatu, kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko hakomeje kuzamuka bigera kuri 16.2% ku mpuzandengo y'igihembwe, ugereranyije uko byari bimeze kuri 12.1% mu gihembwe cya kabiri, ndetse mu kwezi kwa 10 ho rwose byaratumbagiye cyane birenga 20, bigera kuri 20.1%. Ibi ngibi akenshi biraterwa na bya biciro byazamutse cyane ku bintu dukura mu mahanga, ariko n'ubuhinzi ntabwo bwagenze neza mu gihugu muri rusange, ari igihembwe cya mbere ari igihembwe cya kabiri. Ibikomoka ku buhinzi rero, ibiribwa nabyo byakomeje kuzamuka cyane ibiciro ku masoko. Ibi byose iyo tubiteranyije tubona, ubundi mbere twabonaga ko ku mpuzandengo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko muri uyu mwaka bizaba biri kuri 12.1%, ariko twasuye mu mibare dusanga bizazamukaho bigere kuri 13.2%. Ndetse ibiciro bizakomeza kuba hejuru kugera ku mpera z'uyu mwaka no mu ntangiriro z'umwaka utaha bizatangire kumanuka mu gice cya kabiri cy'umwaka utaha. So ibi rero byo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ni ikibazo gikomeye ku bukungu muri rusange, bituma inama ishinzwe politiki y'ifaranga ifata icyemezo cyo kongera kuzamura urwunguko rwa banki nkuru y'igihugu kuva kuri 6 kujya kuri 6 n'ibice 5%. Uko mubyibuka mu gihembwe gishize twari twayizamuye iva kuri 5 n'ibice 5%, iva kuri 5% ijya kuri 6%. Twasanze ari ngombwa ko twongera kuyizamura n'ubu ngubu kugira ngo dukomeze guhangana n'iki kibazo cyo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko. Ubwo ikindi navuga mu ncamake ku bigendanye n'akanama gashinzwe kutajagajega k'urwego rw'imari, ari ku mabanki, ari mu bigo by'ubwishingizi, ari mu kwizigama. Icyo twabonye muri rusange ni uko urwego rw'imari ruhagaze neza, umutungo w'amabanki, ari uw'amabanki, ari uw'ibigo byo kwizigama, ari ibigo by'ubwishingizi, ari ibigo by'imari icitse, byose byarazamutse. Ikindi bipimo dukurikirana byo kutajagajega k'urwego rw'imari, ari kuri kapitali yabo, ari ku mafaranga bafite bakoresha, ari ku bwiza bw'imyenda, byose nabyo bihagaze neza rwose, kure cyane y'ibipimo ntarengwa tuba twaratanze, bitanga icyizere y'uko urwego rw'imari ruhagaze neza, rufite ubushobozi bwo gukomeza gufasha kuzamuka k'ubukungu, rufite ubushobozi bwo gufasha ababigana, ari ababitsamo. Ikindi ni uko no mu kwishyura nabyo bikomeza kwishyura dukoresha ikoranabuhanga, nabyo bikomeza gutera imbere. So mu ncamake rero ni uko tubona ko urwego rw'imari rwose rurakomeye, no mu gihe kiri imbere turabona ko nta mpungenge dufite y'uko hari icyaruhungabanya, ariko dukomeza gukurikiranira hafi ibi byose birimo biba ku rwego rw'isi, n'ibibazo byo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko hano, niba ntaho byagira ingaruka ku bakorana n'amabanki cyangwa ibindi bigo by'imari, bikaba byabitera guhungabana. Ibyo rero ni akazi dukurikirana umunsi ku wundi dukoranye n'ibigo by'imari muri rusange. Tukaba twizera yuko nta mpungenge dufite z'uko hagira ikiba cyahungabanya ibigo by'imari. Murakoze cyane.
Murakoze, Governor. We've come to our time for Q&A. I'd like to ask those that are asking questions, introduce yourself, the media house that you're coming from, and your question. Thank you. Okay, Clement, you can go.
Thank you very much, Governor. My name is Clement for Reuters. You talked of the constraints from climate change affecting agriculture in general. Are you advising the government maybe to borrow, to cushion these effects specifically through green bonds? If so, how much and by when should Rwandans expect this fund to come and help de-escalate the issue? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Krema. Yeah, it's true, climate change is affecting us. In fact, when you look at the inflation, the high inflation we have today, climate change has a big contribution to that because agriculture poor performance is a key driver or a key contributor to this high inflation. I think our advice to government is one, investing in mitigating factors to this climate change, and this, I know it has been a priority with the government, investing in agriculture, and we have technical working groups between different government institutions, and we are part of this. It's at the technical level, even at ministerial level, working or looking at what can be done to address challenges in agriculture. So we don't have to advise on how they finance this. I think what's important is there is need to continue investing in agriculture and investing in mitigating factors that can shield agriculture from these adverse effects of climate change. So I know there's a lot. The other day, government, I think Rwanda was the first to access the new funds from IMF on the resilience facility, and this is mainly focused on dealing with climate change. And what I know, IMF has committed to work with countries to use this money as seed money and mobilize more financing. So government is, I think Rwanda is one of the first 3 countries to access this RST money. Will be benefiting from these efforts from IMF again to work with the countries to mobilize more resources around this particular fund. But as you saw, Rwanda was very present in the recent COP26, if I remember, 27. So, and there were a lot of efforts and engagements on how we can mobilize financing to deal with climate change or to invest in the green economy. So there are a lot of efforts going on. So that's what I can say.
Thank you.
John. Hello? John Williams from the Chronicles. Ku bijyanye n'inguzanyo zitishyurwa neza mwavuze ko zagabanutse, ariko igisobanuro kikaba kivuga ko zagabanutse bitewe n'uko hari inguzanyo zitishyurwa zingana miliyoni 27 z'amafaranga y'u Rwanda mu mezi 9 zakuwe mu bitabo bitewe no kuba zimaze igihe kinini zitishyurwa. Ese iyo zikuwe mu bitabo kubera ko zitishyurwa mukavuga ko zagabanutse, mu by'ukuri atari uko zishyuwe ahubwo ari uko zahanaguwe mu bitabo, nyamara umwenda wukiriho, icyo cyuho mu mabanke gifatwa gite, ninde ukiziba? Akabazo ka kabiri ku bijyanye ni mufite izina ryiza cyane mwese komite ishinzwe ubudahungabana bw'urwego rw'imari. Nibyo koko ibigo by'imari, amabanke n'urwego rw'imari ntabwo ruri guhungabana, ariko ababigana bafite ikibazo cyo guhungabana kw'imikorere yabo, kw'ibikorwa byabo, ndavuga abashoramari ba rwiyemezamirimo n'abandi bagana ibigo by'imari cyane cyane amabanke, bakavuga ko bahungabanywa n'imikorere mibi ya service nkene z'amabanke. Urugero, usanga amabanke arimo umurongo uva aha ngaho ukagera mu muryango, cyangwa kwinjira imbere ukagira ngo ni icyumba cy'urwotero, sauna, bitewe n'uko haba hari gishe 12 hakoresha 3. Abo bantu bazigana nyamara bafite bari registered muri mobile banking, ariko ntibayigane kubera impamvu bamwe batangiye kwicikaho kubera ikibazo cy'amafaranga, umuntu transferinga akava kuyohereje ntagere kuwagenewe, transaction kugira ngo izatungane bigafata hagati y'amezi 3 na 6 muri business, hangirika byinshi, hakaho n'igihombo. Nanone abo mabanke atanga izo service ugasanga hari nadakora mu weekend, ku abagent nabo badakora service zose, transaction zose zidakorerwa ku ma ATM zitanakorwa n'abagents. Soza ibyo ko mureberera amabanke, ariko abagana ibigo by'imari muri uko kudahungabanywa mu bikora iki nka banke y'igihugu? Murakoze.
Murakoze cyane.
Murakoze cyane. Katubanza subiza icyo ngicyo ngira ngo icyambere wenda katujye tuvuga ibintu dufite ibintu bifatika tugendera. Ngira ngo bafashe basubiza hari slides kuri payments and digital payments ko ziba zimeze. Nagira ngo mpere ku kibazo cyawe cya nyuma. Icyambere kanemere yuko haracyarimo akazi ko kurushaho kunoza imikorere y'ibigo by'imari kugira ngo ababigana babone serivisi nziza, ko bikorwa sino kubarengera gusa nyirizina, ariko nuko uko barushaho guhabwa serivisi nziza bakishimira uko bakorana n'amabanki n'ibigo by'imari, niko barushaho no kubigana, niko barushaho kubona serivisi zihuse, niko barushaho gukora ibikorwa bibateza imbere kandi bigateza imbere ubukungu. So ni ikintu gikubiyemo rero byinshi. Niba ubizi hatowe itegeko rishinzwe kurengera abaguzi ba serivisi z'imari, ngira ngo ryasohotse muri 2020 cyangwa 2021. So twebwe nka Central Bank turi bamwe mu bashira mu bikorwa iri tegeko. Ubu twashyizeho department ishinzwe gukurikirana ibibazo by'abaguzi bagana serivisi z'imari. Icyo navuga nuko mu byo yavuze by'imirongo sinzi ubwo ngubwo aho wayibonye iyo mirongo, kuko twebwe iyo dukurikirana iyo tugenzura tubona byaragabanutse cyane ku buryo amabanki asigaye amwe akingura atinze ko nta bantu baba bahari mu mirongo, kandi ni ibintu dukurikirana. None iyo urebye iyi mibare nayishyize hano, let's go to wallet to aho ngaho. Iyo urebye uko amafaranga yoherezwa ava muri banki ajya kuri telefone nuko ava kuri telefone ajya muri banki, hariya twebwe ibyo tubona dukurikirana umunsi ku wundi biratwereka ko byakomeje kugenda bizamuka ndetse cyane. So ubwo rero sinzi ikigo cy'imari wavugaga abantu bagabanyije gukoresha iyi mirongo kubera ko amafaranga buriya mu kirere. Icyo nakubwira none muri kwa gukurikirana uko ibigo by'imari bikora, dufite iminota ntarengwa. Niba jyewe nohereje amafaranga umuntu yagombye ko yamugezeho ubu ngubu muri izi ngizi, yagombye ko yamugezeho, ntabwo nibuka iminota twatanze, ariko hari amategeko abigenga, amabwiriza abigenga, kandi turabikurikirana tukareba ni hehe ikibazo cyabaye, ni hehe cyatewe n'iki, ndetse ikigo cy'imari cyabirangarana tukagihana. So haracyarimo akazi, ntabwo nakubwira rwose ngo birakora 100% n'ishyashya, ariko ukuntu wabitanze uwakumva yabona ko byacitse, kandi ntabwo ari byo. Imibare dufite hariya twebwe twereka ko birushaho kugenda byiyongera. Ku mirongo wavuze mu mabanki, twebwe ubugenzuzi dukora, ubundi kera byacikaga mu mpera z'ukwezi bajya kwishyura imisoro ya RRA. Uyu munsi imisoro ya RRA yose yishyurwa bakoresheje ikoranabuhanga. So niyo mirongo twabonaga mu mpera z'ukwezi zo kwishyura imisoro ya RRA nayo ntabwo tukiyibona. So twavuga rero yuko haracyari inzira yo kurushaho kunoza uko ibigo bikora, ariko ntabwo ari byacitse nk'uko statement zawe zabivugaga. Inguzanyo zitishyurwa nibyo koko ni ikibazo kiba kibangamiye ibigo by'imari, ariko kugira ngo dukomeze kumenya neza uko ikigo cy'imari gihagaze, cyane cyane bya bipimo dukurikirana bya kapitali, ko kapitali bishinzwe guhangana n'ibibazo. Iyo ikigo cy'imari cyahombye, habaye abantu batishyuye, biza kurya muri ya kapitali ya banki. Iyo banki idakoze neza ntikurikirane uko abantu bishyura ngo igaruze amafaranga yayo, bijya muri ya kapitali, icyo gihe tugasaba umushoramari kongeramo amafaranga. Ariko ikizi iyo bunguka, akenshi nk'uko nabivuze, iyo bunguka amafaranga menshi bungutse aguma muri banki, ntabwo bayaha abashoramari. Abenshi abatwara menshi 50% yabo bibungutse andagumamo. Iyo agumyemo abafasha kongera inguzanyo batanga, ariko akanabafasha guhangana n'ikibazo cyavuka cy'imyenda itishyuwe neza. Iki nakubwira nuko niyo baba bayandukuye mu bitabo by'imyenda dukurikirana umunsi ku wundi, ntabwo baba bayihanaguye burundu, barakomeza bagakurikirana bene abafite imyenda bakayishyuza. So biriya kenshi tubikora kugira ngo imyenda igaragara mu bitabo bikurikirana umunsi ku wundi ibe koko ariyo twizeye ko bazashobora kwishyuza. Yaba imaze umwaka nyirayo yananiwe kwishyura, bagiye kujya gukurikirana ibyo kugurisha ingwate, icyo gihe twavuga yishyire ku ruhande, bikurikirane ku ruhande, ariko twebwe turebe ko kapitali yawe igendanye na za risk ufite z'imyenda. So kigihe rero wirengera ibibazo, n'ubundi ni banki irabikurikirana ikishyuza uwo muntu wafashe umwenda. Iyo bihombye burundu bikanga, kuko nabyo bibaho, icyo gihe bijya mu kibazo. Niyo mpamvu tubasaba ko bafite kapitali iremereye ishobora guhangana n'ikibazo cy'abantu batashoboye kwishyura neza. So ubwo navuga yuko ikigo cy'imari nicyo kirengerwa, wananiwe kwishyura, bateje ibyo byose bagasanga bashoboye kuyagaruza yose, icyo gihe niwe wabyirengera. Ariko mfite abagenzi banjye hano, sinzi nabo bashaka kugira icyo yongeraho kuri ibyo nari mvuze. Murazi.
Murakoze Gavana. Wenda icyo nakongeraho nuko hari impamvu ebyiri tugaragaza zatumye igipimo cy'inguzanyo zitishyurwa neza kigabanuka. Iya mbere nk'uko mubivuga ni iriya myenda yasibwe mu bitabo by'amabanki, ariko nanone nitwirengagize ko hari n'imyenda myinshi ku rundi ruhande yatanzwe n'amabanke. Izo mpamvu ebyiri rero nizo zisobanura uko kugabanuka kw'ikigero cy'inguzanyo zitishyurwa neza. Nk'uko mubivuze Governor, ahanini dusaba banke nka Central Bank, dusaba banke gukurikirana imyenda, gushishoza mu gutanga inguzanyo ndetse no gukurikirana abakiriya. Ibyo rero nibyo bituma iyo habayeho igihombo, kubera ko wenda hari uruhande banke yirengagije itakozeho neza, bisaba ko banke yirengera icyo gihombo, ariko kandi ya myenda ibitarishyuwe neza ikomeza gukurikiranwa, kubera ko banke nayo iba yarateganyije ibihombo. Ahangaha nibyo twita provisions, iba yarateganyije ibyo bihombo iyo batabashije kwishyurwa neza izo provision cyangwa se iryo teganyiriza bihombo rigumya kurya kuri kapitali za banke, ku buryo dusaba ko banke cyangwa se ikigo cy'imari cyongera iyo kapitali kugira ngo nyine kirengere ibyo bihombo byabaye. Murakoze.
Murakoze. Dushobora kwakira ibibazo bibiri. Hari ibibazo twabonye online ariko
murakoze Governor, nitwa Odile Kushatse, mvuye kuri radio Imanzi. Ikibazo cyanjye kiragana n'ubundi ku bigo by'imari. Nibazaga ngo hakorwa iki kugira ngo za banki zongere umusaruro cyangwa se zongere umubare w'abahabwa inguzanyo mu nyuma ya Covid, ariko no muri bino bibazo mwagiye mubigaragaza biri gutuma ubukungu bugenda mu buryo butari bwiza. Burakoze.
Murakoze cyane. Vincent.
Murakoze Governor. Vincent Gasana, KT Press. Inflation continues to be the main focus, and I continue to be puzzled by a question I asked the last time we were here. I didn't explain myself properly, and just wonder if I could repeat it again. I mean, there are the clear, well-researched fundamentals of the economy that the bank looks at that raises inflation, some of it external and some of them internal. And there are also, but there seems to be somewhere in the middle, there seems to be inflationary attitudes within the country. And the prices, inflation normally rises gradually. You could end up thinking to yourself, well, prices have gone up over a few months or sometimes even a year. But the prices in Rwanda seems to lurch forward. Fluctuations can be within a week. And one wonders, is there some intangible reason why we seem to have an almost inflationary attitude in the country? An example of agriculture, for instance. If the agriculture performance has been poor and the demand is outstripping supply, fine, that's understandable. But sometimes the supply is there and the demand hasn't changed, and yet these fluctuations keep coming, and as I say, sometimes even within days. Last time I gave the example of coffee, okay? Coffee is not a typical basket within the products within the basket. But if you look at milk, ibishimbo, these things just go up and down, and fluctuations are just seems to be lurched forward and backwards and so on. Is it an attitude? What is it?
Okay, thank you. Can respond to those? And I request my colleagues to come in here. So, DG, if you don't mind, you respond to the question from Radio Manzi, and then Chief Economist on the question on inflation. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Kuri icyo kibazo babajije cy'inguzanyo, iyo urebye mu mibare inguzanyo zikomeza kuzamuka, ntago umubare w'abahabwa inguzanyo cyangwa uko zingana, sinzi niba twashyiraho slide ya new authorized loans, ariko ubona ko amabanki akomeje gutanga inguzanyo ku buryo bushimishije. Ahubwo icyo twavuga ni ibibazo byagiye bigaragara muri sector zimwe zitandukanye bitewe n'icyorezo cya kovide byaba mu mahoteli ibyo twabigaragaje, ariko ikindi tubona ni uko no mu rwego rw'inganda harimo ibibazo byo kwishyura iyo myenda bitewe cyane cyane n'ibiciro bya raw materials cyangwa ibyo bakoresha kugira ngo mu nganda kugira ngo babone umusaruro cyangwa se ibiciro byabo bya transport na energy. Aho niho navuga yuko harimo ariho tubona ikibazo cyane cyane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me try to answer this question. I think looking at how prices are increasing, you mentioned two things. You mentioned the level of the supply, the level of the demand. In Rwanda, as we are looking at the numbers and what Governor was presenting, growth has been high, so the demand is still there. So the demand is still there. You may have price increase because of short reducing supply. That's the case for agricultural goods, foods. But you also can have price increase because of the cost of producing these goods. So for example, some of the manufacturing goods, and because of the cost of importing these goods, if these goods are imported. One example, and here I want to touch on products that are not part of energy or foods. So part of the core inflation, for some products, prices have increased. And you're right to ask why, since it is not directly linked to international commodities. But there could be some logistic costs, or let's say the time normally that was necessary to transport those goods that has increased significantly. One example is, for example, furnishing equipment, house furnishing equipment. These are goods that are the beginning of the year, and now prices have increased almost every month. One of the reasons is that logistics was becoming difficult, and maybe instead of importing after 1 month, you may get the goods after 3 months. So you see that, and at a higher cost, of course, because of international oil prices, international transport. So what I want to summarize here is that you can have price increase rapidly in our situation, indirectly linked to the global challenges, either delay the level of the Black Sea or in China to import those goods, or increase in the cost of transport. And that's the case for a lot of imported goods and a lot of inputs to the manufacturing goods for which prices have increased. I hope I have answered part of it.
But the domestic production, domestic products mostly, so in agriculture, for instance, yes, those can be affected by transportation costs, by the logistics, as you say, but sometimes little has changed. You know, let's look at the price of milk, for instance. It can change within a space of days sometimes, and one just wonders.
No, for agriculture, what I was talking about is mostly imported goods and industrial goods, but for agriculture it's a supply issue. Even if you take the example of milk, milk is often affected by drought. So drought is affecting the production of milk, and the demand being still high, we know how the demand of milk is in Rwanda, then the milk prices increase. So that's mostly related to a supply issue.
Sorry, Ivan is the Deputy Director of the Institute of Statistics, Deputy Director General, but he's a member of the Monetary Policy Committee as well. So thank you, Ivan.
Thank you, Governor. I wanted to compliment Thierry. So if I heard your question, you had two aspects to it. One is to do with, you know, the regularity of increase. You talked of, let's say, weekly basis. And maybe you're saying, well, there's a season. A season has happened. And the other aspect to what you said is it an attitude issue? Let me start with that. I don't think attitude plays so much a role in business. Let's say milk. You don't wake up and say, I feel like I want to just make my price higher. You will face the reality of the market. So now the regularity is an interesting one. Yes, pick again the example of milk. When someone is selling today, they are looking in their shop, in their boutique, and saying, today I had 100 liters demanded, maybe I had 50 liters. And they are talking to whoever they are getting the quantities from, and depending on the assurances of how they are continuously going to get the 100 that is demanded each day, then that also factors into how tomorrow they might change, or the other day they might change, because it's not necessarily a seasonal issue. Again, pick of, let's say, beans, which a season has ended, and the first week there's a lot that has come to the market, but in the ensuing weeks, maybe it starts to come less, depending on the total stock that came through the various parts of the country. So what we are saying here is that, yes, a season brings an output, but that output flows into the market at different points in time. And depending on the total stock that came through, if the season was good, then that flow will continuously come on the market, because as you know, there's some that will be dried. But if the total stock was not enough, in few weeks it will be going down, and indeed changes will be happening indeed bi-weekly. So that's what really I can add.
Thank you so much, Ivan. We have two questions from Bana Namata from the East African. Says, thank you, Governor, for your presentation. My question relates to inflation. Given that the recent spike in inflation is not demand-driven, some economists are cautioning that tightening monetary policy may constrain growth. What's your take? What other measures are needed to help contain this inflation? We have another one from Bloomberg, Seoul. It says, with the increasing inflation and global uncertainties, what is the growth forecast this year? Will the growth be revised downwards? And if yes, what are the projections?
Can you repeat the one from Seoul?
It says, with the increasing global inflation, uncertainties, what is the growth forecast for this year? Will the growth be revised downwards? And if yes, what are the projections? Thank you.
Maybe Saul missed the presentation. I think we said in the presentation that, and I think Saul was there also in the Ministry of Finance, that growth has been revised upwards from 6% to 6.8% because of the strong performance in the first half of the year at 7.7. And we are saying, when you look at the performance of the third quarter, with our CIA growing at 17%, we expect the third quarter to be equally strong in terms of the growth of the economy. So in fact, I don't want to say so, but it will be revised upwards even from the 6.8. But I think what happened was revising down next year to 6.1%, 6.2. Next year, we expect it to be around 6.2. So yes, despite all the challenges, because of the recovery in industry and service sector, we see growth this year expected to remain strong. Now, Bana, your question is an interesting question that is asked, I think, every central bank today. It's like the tools you are using as central banks to deal with inflation are not going to really directly affect or address the causes of this inflation, because it's mainly supply driven. But I think as central bankers, our main concern is on second round effects. So as we see increases of prices because of supply shocks, I think similar to what Gasana said, people start thinking of increasing prices on and on and on and on. So what normally monetary policy is aiming at is to avoid that spiral in this inflation driven by supply shocks. But if not attended to, it would really drive inflationary pressures even beyond the supply shocks. So that's what we are trying to address. Will it affect economic performance? Maybe. it's already happening global, as I said in my first, I mean during the presentation, because normally with the increase of policy rates, the transmission mechanism is not that strong, so we don't see financing rates immediately following the central bank rates. But where the transmission mechanism is strong, we've seen financing costs really increasing, and that automatically will affect investment and will slow down economic performance. But as we all understand, I think inflation is the worst you can ever have in any economy, so you use any tools you have to deal with it that could cause short-term pain in terms of slowdown of the economy, but the longer-term gains of bringing down inflation are much bigger than the short-term pain you face of reduced economic performance. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll take the last, so let's start from Alice from TNT. Yes, the last three.
Thank you. My name's Alice from the New Times. I would like to ask, what are the projections for next year that specifically informs the decision to reinstate the reserve ratio to 5%? And how will this affect the borrowers? Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Murakoze, nitwa David Nzabonema, nkorera radio na TV10. Ikibazo nanjye mfite nyakwa gavana kiragaruka kuri inflation, icyo kibazo kiri kuvugwa muri iyi minsi. Hari nk'abanyabukungu, hari na mugenzi wanjye bakibajijeho ko bavuga bati uburyo bwo kuzamura iyi rate Central Bank tangira amafaranga bwabyo ntibihagije, bati ahubwo bishobora kuba bidindiza abantu gufata amafaranga uzayishyira ku nyungu ndende nini, bishobora kubaca intege. Bati hakabaye habaho uburyo bwo kongera umusaruro by'umwihariko w'ubuhinzi, nk'uko mugenzi wanjye bivuze ati kuki bizamuka n'ibya hano bihingwa mu Rwanda bikazamuka. Bati hakabaye hafatwa uburyo bwo kuzamura umusaruro w'ubuhinzi. Nyakubahwa gavana, ubwo buryo bwo burashoboka? N'izo mpungenge bagaragaza zifite ishingiro? Ikindi ni kimwe nyakubahwa, mu minsi yashize ibi biciro byajyaga bizamuka, hakavugwa na COVID muri biriya byose bituma ibiciro bizamuka. Mwagaragaje COVID ntayajemo, ari nabyo rimwe na rimwe havugwamo bya bintu byo gufunga imipaka ngo ibicuruzwa ntibyambuka ntibiza. Ariko usibye na COVID yagenjeje make, hari n'imipaka imaze gufunguka, imaze iminsi ifunguwe. Se bwo bucuruzi hari icyo bwaba bwarafashije ku bukungu bw'u Rwanda? Murakoze.
Murakoze cyane. Reka dufate Jeannette cyanyuma.
Murakoze, nitwa Ababyeyi Jeannette, ndi umunyamakuru wa televiziyo Rwanda. Ikibazo cyanjye kirajya gusa n'icya mugenzi wanjye, ko gukomeza kuzamura iki gipimo fatizo banki igurizaho izindi banki, se ahubwo ntabwo bishobora kuba byahungabanya ubukungu by'umwihariko ishoramari, kubera yuko abantu baba babona amafaranga abahenze? Se kuba mukomeza kuzamuka nuko igipimo mwari mwashyizeho mbere mwasanze bitari bihagije, cyangwa se ahubwo nta musaruro biri gutanga? Murakoze.
Murakoze Jeannette.
Thank you. Ubwo hari I think starting with the New Times question, you want to address that, Chief Economist, and linking the story behind the increase of or restatement of the reserve ratio. TV10 ngira ngo ikibazo ubwo nari nagishubije mu cyongereza, kuzamuka impamvu tuzamura uko bisa nanone n'ibya Jeannette yarabajije. Nibyo ngira ngo nk'uko tubivuga, sinzi niba nabisobanuye neza muri presentation, ariko no muri press release birimo, ntabwo ibyo dukora nka banki nkuru bihagije guhangana n'iki kibazo cyo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro dufite. hari izindi ngamba zitandukanye zikorwa na leta zishyirwa mu bikorwa na leta zimwe nizo gutanga nkunganire ku bintu nkunganire ku mafaranga abagenzi bakenera muri za bisi ibi byatumye bigabanya ingaruka ibyo byakagize kuri inflation tubona iri hejuru n'ubu ngubu gutanga nkunganire mu buhinzi ku nyongeramusaruro iyo ngiyo irafasha kuba abahinzi bagura inyongeramusaruro bidahenze cyane bakashora mu buhinzi bakayishyira mu buhinzi bikazamura umusaruro nanone nanavuze kare ko dufite akanama gahuriweho n'impuguke zitandukanye kakurikirana iby'ubuhinzi uyu munsi natwe turimo nka banki nkuru y'igihugu iyo ni ukureba ibyakorwa nk'igihugu kugira ngo turusheho kuzamura umusaruro uturuka ku buhinzi hari byinshi byakorwa hari bimwe uyu munsi bigoye guhita gutanga igisubizo havuye nk'izuba ryinshi hari gahunda za leta zo kuzamura ibintu byo kuhira guhinga dukoresha kuhira ariko ibyo ni ibintu bifata umwanya ariko byibuze nk'ibibazo bigendanye n'inyongeramusaruro uko zigeze mu baturage uko zikoreshejwe imbuto z'indobanure uko zigeze mu baturage uko zikoreshejwe guhingira ku gihe ibyo byose minisiteri ishinzwe ubuhinzi n'ubworozi irabikurikirana ariko nka leta muri rusange nk'ibigo bya leta bishinzwe iki kibazo twese tugira uruhare mu gukurikirana kureba uko bikorwa n'uko bikorwa neza n'uko bikorwa ku gihe serivisi z'iteganyagihe zirakora zite zirarushaho gufasha abakora igenamigambi ibyo byose ni ibintu biza hamwe gufasha kongera umusaruro cyane cyane mu bintu by'ubuhinzi ibyo ngibyo ni ibintu biriho bikorwa kandi ari hamwe twizeye igisubizo mu gusubiza hasi iki kibazo cy'umuvuduko w'ibiciro so ibyo ntabwo bibujije banki nkuru y'igihugu gukora akazi kayo igomba gukora ibyo dukora ni kimwe mu bisubizo bigomba kubaho bifatanya n'ibindi byose bikorwa gushobora gusubiza hasi ikibazo cyangwa se gukemura ikibazo turimo cyo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ku masoko nk'uko mubivuze n'ibyo ibi kuzamura k'urwunguko rwa banki nkuru y'igihugu birahita nk'uko mwabonye mu mibare bihita bizamura urwunguko rw'amafaranga amabanki uko agurizanya hagati yayo kugeza ubu ntabwo turabona bigira ingaruka kuzamura ko urwunguko amabanki yaka abayigana ariko ubundi ikiba kigamijwe cyane cyane ku mafaranga abantu bagura bafata mu mabanki kujya muri consommation ibintu byihuse ko yagabanuka uko amafaranga agabanuka mu bantu ngira ngo mu bisubizo Thierry ya Chief Economist yahaye Gasana ibiciro bishobora kuzamuka kubera ko iyo mfite amafaranga nkasanga igiciro cyazamutse ndagura ntacyo mba nitayeho ariko iyo mfite amafaranga makeya n'iyo igiciro kizamutse ntekereza kabiri imbere y'uko ngura icyo gihe wa wundi wazamuraga igiciro bikamuca intege ntakomeze kuzamura kuko yabuze abaguzi niko ibi byemezo bya banki nkuru y'igihugu niko bikora ubundi bica intege amafaranga ajya mu bantu bikagabanya abantu ko bihutira kugura ibintu bigaca intege wa wundi washaka kuzamura kuko yabuze abaguzi bamubanye bakeya bikagabanya wa muvuduko w'ibiciro kuzamuka ariko ibyo ukurikije imiterere y'ubukungu bwacu ntabwo byihuta gutanga igisubizo nko kuzamura umusaruro nk'uko mwabivugaga ni ibintu ni ingamba zitandukanye dufashe twese dushyira hamwe kugira ngo duhangane n'iki kibazo cyo kuzamuka kw'ibiciro ntabwo twabyihorera gusa dutyo ikindi ni ubutumwa dutanga ku mabanki ku bantu kuvuga ngo tekereza kabiri mbere y'uko ujya kugura ikintu gihenze ayo mafaranga yo kugira ngo uyigure wenda wayashyira mu kwizigama ko ubu iyo tuzamuye urwunguko uyu munsi bondi za leta nazo zarazamutse kubera zagiye zikurikira kuzamuka k'urwunguko rwa beneri aho kugira ngo ugure ikintu udakeneye noneho kitari ingenzi amafaranga we yabitse mu ishoramari ibi biciro bibanze bisubire hasi icyo gihe biragabanya pressure biragabanya ko ba bantu baza bashaka kugura bitume wagatekereje kongera kuzamura agenda buhoro bigatuma muri rusange ibiciro bidakomeza gutumbagira cyane n'ibyo niko bikora muri politique monétaire ariko igafatanya ku gihugu nk'icyacu tugomba gufatanya n'ingamba zo kuzamura umusaruro nk'uko byavugwaga. Gufungura imipaka yarafungutse ariko bafite ibibazo nk'ibyo dufite. Iyo urebye inflation zabo nazo ni nk'izacu. Ikibazo cy'umusaruro w'ibiribwa ari Bugande ari Burundi wenda ni imipaka yari ifunze nabo nta bufite ibiribwa birenze tw'ibyo dufite, ndetse no muri Kenya na Tanzania hari hasanzwe hatanafunze. Hari ni ikibazo kiri global kubera ko ikibazo cya climate change, so hari ikibazo rero cy'umuvuduko w'ibiciro hose no kuba umusaruro w'ubuhinzi utaragenze neza muri twese. So numva uyu munsi ntabwo turimo tubibona bidutangira igisubizo cyihuse, ariko ubwo uko turimo dufata ibyemezo nabo niko babifata, ubwo twizeye yuko mu mwaka utaha ibintu bizarushaho kugenda neza. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Chief Economist would.
Thank you. I'll just add on what Governor was explaining. The Monetary Policy Committee sits quarterly to take a decision on the appropriate central bank rate. So this, depending on the situation, depending on the projections, which keep on changing in this, depending also on the global environment, you might decide on a particular central bank rate that will not be adequate for the next meeting or the following meeting. This is why there's always this evaluation of what's the appropriate central bank rate. Now, coming to the reserve requirement, I want to compare two situations. The situation of April 2020, where this reserve requirement ratio went down, it was decided to reduce it from 5 to 4%. At this time, we're facing COVID. Growth was expected to be very low, and actually it was negative in 2020. At the same time, there were some issues on liquidity. So what this decision was about in 2020 was supporting the economy through injecting liquidity in a time of an economic crisis. Now I'm comparing it to the situation right now, where the economy recovered from COVID. We are above the pre-COVID levels. Growth is very high, and at the same time we have a very problematic, a very big issue of inflation being in double digits. So now the MPC decided to go back to the reserve requirement ratio of 5% because the situation is different, and we don't need again to have this liquidity in the economy. We need the opposite. We need actually slow down in this liquidity to reduce inflation. And right now the numbers we are having is that there's enough liquidity to cater for this increase. So to answer, the situation is different. We are not going back to normal. We are going back to a normal level, or a good level of liquidity, good level of growth, but with a problem of inflation. So one more reason to go back to 5%. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Economist. Thank you all. Thank you to our media partners for attending this press conference this morning, and would like to wish you a good day. Thank you.
Again, to add what Bob has just said, I want to thank you again for accepting our invitation. Mwakoze cyane mwese kubana natwe. Ubwo twizeye ko muri budutumikire neza. Umunsi mwiza.